All right, welcome everybody to the Mac Reality Check. It's a semi-monthly thing we do where we sit down with somebody and talk about their expertise. And today we have an amazing guest. I just finished his book, Matthew Facciani. I'm going to do the bio. I have an official bio. Worked hard on the bio. And then we're going to jump into these questions and then we'll open it up. So let me tell you about Matthew. Matthew Facciani is an interdisciplinary social scientist and postdoctoral researcher at the University of Notre Dame, focused on media literacy, misinformation, social networks, political polarization, identities, and artificial intelligence. Matthew is the author of the recently published book, Misguided, Where Misinformation Starts, How It Spreads, and What to Do About It, which is a solid rundown that lives up to its title. He's on stage at conferences, written for media outlets. He's running an excellent Substack that you should subscribe to and a podcast. And he's here today to talk about all this and how it might relate to marketing accountability. Matthew, welcome to the Reality Check.
Thank you so much, Jake. It's been great to be here.
Yay! Before we hit record, this man has gotten so many LinkedIn DMs from me. I'm like, oh, I love your book. Oh, can you come on the show? And what about this? What about this? What about this? So I'm glad we have you isolated here. So I'm just going to jump into the, thank you for spending your Friday with us. This book is amazing. As I said, I finished it. It couldn't have been timed better. We've been dealing with fake news in earnest for over a decade. Just tell us a bit why you think this book is so important right now.
Yeah, I mean, as you mentioned, it's really grown in popularity the last 10 years or so. So I've been studying this a little bit more than that. So I've kind of seen the explosion of interest in misinformation, fake news, false information, all those terms. And with the age of artificial intelligence, social media, there's more of a discussion and more of a concern of people being able to tell what's true and what's not true. So unfortunately, I don't think this issue is going away anytime soon. And I am glad that more people are talking about it. And I'm happy that I can contribute to that conversation.
Yes. And so, there's a lot of insight, deep research in this book. It's half footnotes.
It is.
He brought receipts.
True researcher.
That's, but so just in general, if somebody's in passing, what are the top takeaways? Because I know what I have, but just give us the isolated takeaways from the book that they need to understand from this research. Like if they took one thing away.
Yeah, absolutely. So as you mentioned, the book is about half footnotes, so it's actually not as long as it looks. And I
fell for that.
So I did try to be very thorough and back up what I was saying. And I like that it's a book where it has all those academic components, but I hope that it's also accessible and not too dense and jargony. I tried to really make the case for what I was trying to argue for, in addition to having that scientific support. So that's kind of the main thing when you mentioned the length, because it's something that I remember thinking about whenever I was writing it.
It's all good.
So it's kind of like a nice, it could be used as almost like a textbook, a supplement to an academic course. And actually, there's a couple professors that have reached out to me and said that they have used it for their own courses. So that's really cool. But it's also definitely aimed at a general audience. It's not supposed to be this academic dense book. So as far as main takeaways, the approach that I took with this book was to address the social and psychological forces that explain why we are vulnerable to misinformation. Misinformation being broadly defined as false or misleading information. And I approached this from the angle of how do these forces guide us to process information differently or misguide us. And one of the main things I talk about in the book is the concept of identities. And identities in the social psychology literature refer to these sets of meanings that we have that correspond to our identities and that guide our behavior. So we all have thousands of identities, parent, sports fan, academic, marketer, whatever you do and how you see yourself can define yourself. And we want to adhere to the certain roles and meanings of those identities. When we do so, it provides us with self-esteem. So we're constantly motivated to maintain consistency between the roles and meanings of our identities and our everyday behaviors. So in many ways, this is good. It can help us navigate social situations and connect with other people. But when we're extremely motivated to protect these identities and the meanings associated with those identities conflict with the best available evidence, then we may start believing things that are untrue. So what I try to really focus on in the book are where are the certain conditions and contexts where this becomes most problematic and we're most vulnerable to this process. Because it's one thing to just say, okay, we have this identity, we're going to be motivated to protect it. But then what else can we look for more specifically that can make us aware of this process and when we might be most vulnerable? And then one of the ways, so one of the big takeaways of the book is thinking about how our identities intersect with other identities. And the academic term for this is social identity complexity. It's basically thinking about how complex our network structures or the identity structures are within us. So you can think about if you have an important identity, let's say a political identity, that by itself may not bias you all that much. But if your political identity is overlapping with the meanings of your religious identity, maybe your friend identity, maybe where you work, and all of those meanings are completely overlapping with each other, we know that they actually can reinforce each other and become more important to you, which influences your behavior even more. So the more shared overlap of your meanings, the more motivated you are to protect the way you interact in your everyday life, because so much of your self-esteem is dependent on those narrow set of meanings. So if people were able to expand their identity maps and have a broader reservoir of self-esteem that they can use and recall when they need it, they're not going to be so vulnerable to believing falsehoods, because encountering challenging information that attacks just one identity doesn't feel like an attack on your overall sense of self.
Gosh, I mean, so that's the one thing. I
Wow.
love it.
That is
like
deep.
if you, and she's like, oh, I have to catch a train. You'd be like, oh, one more thing. So no, what you said, if everyone's following along at home, is so amazing. Talking about the forces, talking about identity. I think that was the big thing that I took away. I was like, oh, this isn't an information quantity game, where I can get more facts thrown at you and that's going to do it. And because that's the frustrating logic that you experience. And then intersection. So when and the overlaps. But I thought it was interesting because the way you described it, you started with the receiver, the person that's taking it in. You didn't talk about transmitters. So I think that's kind of key, where like, as I'm describing this to you, I'm not going to tell you about all the liars out there. That's not my job. There's so many of them. We would spend half our lifetime pointing a finger, but I think it's important that you put it on us to think about how we're thinking, how we're identifying with all of the different us's. And so one of the us's is the marketers. And one of the things that we like is incentives. And one of the things we like to do is just maybe spread not misinformation, but just lightly flavored information. So I'm thinking about incentives, that like this misinformation doesn't exist for itself. It's made for a purpose. So you talked about the identity, the main takeaways, the intersectionality of it all, but get into the incentives and the intent a bit. Like, do you think there are roots of misinformation that come from marketing, advertising, and sales?
Sure. I mean, I think there's some overlap there as far as how you present information and how you're trying to catch people's attention. And for my world, I often think about the realm of science communication and this trade-off between accuracy and sensationalism, and how we want to catch people's attention, but we don't want to be too sensationalist to the point where we're not accurate. And I think that's always the balance of anyone who's communicating any type of information, is you want to get people's attention, you want to resonate with them, but you don't want to mislead them. And sometimes there's a fine line there. Sometimes there are some trade-offs of, being 100% accurate might mean this very dense, jargony filled textbook. But if you skip to some of the highlights, some of the essentials, you're not having all of that detail by definition. And is that less accurate necessarily? Like maybe it could be in a sense. So the way I think about it is you're constantly having this trade-off and trying to balance how you're presenting the information you're presenting, and if you're omitting too much to the point where it's misleading or misinformation. And I think that matters because if you do go too far along that path, you can lose trust in your audience. And if people think that they're being misled, then they might seek out someone else.
Maybe you don't know that. We can drag them along for a pretty long while. But talk about the incentives around creating misinformation writ large. Like,
sure,
what are people making money off of this? How explain?
Yes.
Is there an economy here?
Yeah. So as you mentioned, my book mostly focuses on the receiver and our interaction with information and how our biases influence how we process information. But there's tons of work on the producers of misinformation or disinformation, the purposeful intent to trying to mislead people. So that's disinformation. And yeah, there's a ton of money to be made. I mean, basically what you could do. So before I was talking more broadly about trying to communicate information in a way that builds trust and is not leading people astray. That's kind of the ideal. However, in our current market systems and our current digital landscape, it's very profitable to lean into spreading myths and lies to your audience if they like hearing those myths and lies. So in many ways, you're providing entertainment in the forms of falsehoods. So you can present yourself as someone who's not lying, like you're not openly saying, hey, I'm lying about this. Right. But you're basically skewing the truth so much or focusing so much on a skewed perception of true events to the point where your audience is going to like it. And the easiest example of this is with politics. And that's why I talk about politics a lot, because it's a very clear-cut example of this where you can have a political group, you know what your political group likes, and you just skew the information to the point that could be false or misleading. But because they have the meanings and values associated with that political identity, they're going to want to keep reading it because it makes them feel good, and you're selling that emotion to them. And that's a very profitable way to navigate our digital ecosystem.
Yeah. And I well, at the end, we'll talk about, some guidance that you might have for marketers that are thinking, should I go down this road or go down that road? But you made me think, is it possible that I could read your book and reverse engineer it and find a way to make and spread information and make sure no one can do anything about it? Is it possible? Is there a concern that exposing the machinery and the details of it and how to use it is putting maybe more, power tools in the hands of, what do you think about that?
It's possible, but I'm not overly concerned about that because I think it's already happening so much and at so much scale that I don't think my book is going to reveal all that much. And a lot of it is, this stuff has been known for centuries, how to mislead people. Again, basically you tell them what they want to know and you keep repeating the lie. Like those two things can explain a lot of the supply side of misinformation,
or what they want to feel. And I think that emotion, what you were talking about, and then the word infotainment came to mind.
Right.
And I have been told as a content marketer, my job is to have infotainment or edutainment. But I worked at a museum in nature and science, and I dressed up as a flying squirrel to teach Bernoulli's fluid principles. And so there is a possibility for you to bring education and entertainment together, but you have to be willing to dress up as a squirrel. Okay, here's my thought, Matthew. It's bad. You said the systems are obvious. The incentives are there. There's an awareness of how to manipulate people, but we're not aware of how we're manipulated. This book is helping us. Can you talk to me about what's this utopian vision? Maybe, and I put it in words because I know every utopian is just straight up dystopian too. But what's a good, healthy landscape media ecosystem like this whole malfunctioning body that we're living in right now and we're having to react to? What is a healthy outlook look like to you? What would it have in it? How would we behave? Give it.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few different components, and it depends on what level of analysis you want to focus on. So, on a micro level, I think ideally we'd have more education and more people thinking about these topics. You'd have more media literacy in classrooms, and that literacy of media and information would be paired with what I call psychological literacy. So, a lot of my book, hopefully, will allow people to understand more about themselves so they're better able to navigate their own biases and understand when they might be biased in processing information. So you can pair those media literacy skills in the book with also psychological literacy skills. So you're not just selectively applying media literacy when it's convenient or aligns with your identity structures. So that's on the micro level, what I think would be helpful.
That's a good one.
But then, of course, there's the structural and broader macro levels as well. So when I think about the way society is structured, and I talk about this a little bit in the book, and I talk about it outside of the book a lot, this concept of the lack of third spaces in American culture, where we go to work, we go home, but we don't really have a lot of opportunities for that third space to connect with other people, especially other people who might think differently than us.
And I think this, right? We're talking about Starbucks.
Yeah. So yeah, it used to be Starbucks. So that was one of the selling points of it. But yeah, but not anymore. And there really is not many spaces like that where you can go into your community and talk with lots of different people who many may think differently than you. And again, when I was talking about that identity structure and that point of vulnerabilities, when a lot of our identities overline in meanings, and then this also connects to when a lot of our network connections also align with our identity meanings. So I think it's really important to broaden our identities, broaden our networks, basically providing diversity within ourselves and our network connections. And one way to do that is if our society was structured so we could actually talk with people who are different than us. And I think, again, that would require like funding these types of spaces to pop up and getting people able to actually attend them. Like, if people are working 2 jobs and they don't have a lot of time to spend, in a third space, that's another broader issue that contributes to this. So I think in the background, there's always those broader macro level processes, such as, inequality. Like, as long as we have global inequality and people struggling to make ends meet, there's going to be a vulnerability for believing falsehoods because people are in this vulnerable state.
Well, I mean, that's super interesting. I just want to, don't we need like role models for this? Like if we have politicians that are saying it's the Democrats' fault or it's the Republicans' fault, doesn't that sort of trickle down to everyone and say, like, why would I try and get along with anyone if, I've never seen it like this where like Kristi Noem is saying the reason why the delay in air traffic control is happening is because of the Democrats. That's not factually true. It's an interpretation. And so I'm just wondering what would be the halo effect that would get people to get out of their way and start talking to each other and embracing this cultural diversity that is necessary to shift this dynamic.
Yeah, it would be nice if our leadership displayed better leadership qualities. And people do follow cues from political elites, as they're called in some of the political science literature. So like we do see this effect that whenever our political leaders behave a certain way, it can influence how people respond to it and how their own behavior unfolds. It is a little two-way though, like your political base can influence policy and how political leaders will act. It's just tricky again in the American political system. You can lean into your base of support and still win elections. And there's not always that incentive to promote civility or bipartisanship because you can just be a very successful politician by riling up your own side. And that's a broader macro level issue with the political ecosystem we have here in the United States. But at the same time, it's interesting, like politicians have used that recently to be successful. And I wonder if eventually the pendulum's going to shift, because there's so many people that are tired with the political polarization, and most people do not live on the extremes, either left or right. And I do think the pendulum's going to shift back, and people are going to be tired of this rhetoric of, demonizing your political opponents, when in the reality is you all should be working for us, the people, to get stuff done. So yeah, I would like to see better leadership and competence from politicians, but you have to understand they're working within this political ecosystem that incentivizes them to behave in certain ways.
Right. The intent and the incentives wrapped up in identities. I mean, it's so I want to ask you one more question and then we'll open the floor up because I've been sitting on some questions that I haven't even asked. Pretty sure our panel has too. So speaking to advertisers, marketers, because I'm thinking, man, is that really 30%? It's 18%. Let's round it up a bit. Did we really get that many likes? I'm just going to add on a couple. Like, we have so many opportunities to not misinform or misguide, but just sort of just put a little paprika on the truth. So I just like, if you're talking to the marketers in the house and the advertisers in the house, and they have to choose between saying it straight or padding the truth, what's your advice to them? That they can maybe take a beat and think, because it's happening in emails. It's happening in like, oh yeah, I did that already. I don't know. Like, there's a lot of passing the buck. What's your advice to us marketers?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think it comes back to that conversation earlier of trade-offs. My advice would be to carefully consider those trade-offs and what your goals are. And if a short-term misleading post may spike, your followers, but is that worth the long-term cost of trust? Maybe you think it would be. I don't know. It really depends on the context. Like, if you really want to get people looking at your product and you want to get hype, then maybe I don't know, that's part of the calculation. But as far as me, I think a lot about scientific information, and the framework that I approach is that we should try to get people's attention in a way that is not sacrificing accuracy. And you can do that by emotional storytelling and trying to connect with audiences where they are. So I think some of that would apply to marketing as well. Like, you're still selling information in a way. You're still trying to get people like, hey, I wrote this article, I want people to pay attention to it, or I have this product and I want people to also pay attention to it. So I think carefully considering the trade-offs and being mindful of that, and trying to consider how your words could be used against you in the future. If you say something that's incorrect and your audience turns on you, then you could be stuck in a way that's really hard to regain that trust once it's lost.
I wanted to just say so much. So I'll open it up to the floor. What is happening, people? What do you have? I have questions. I know you have questions. Moni?
Yeah, I can start. So you mentioned that obviously, identity is very strong. I 1000% agree. I kind of teach identity versus personas in marketing, because that's what good marketing speaks to. But the misinformation sort of playing into these biases based on identity. But like, what about the opposite, where there's always a push and pull? These guys know my famous saying is like, struggling between being ethical and giving people what they want, right? Mm-hmm. Which is part of our job too, as well as marketers. So what about the opposite, where it's you speak the truth, it doesn't confirm someone's identity and they reject it? So how do you give good information, true information, and maybe that good information combats their identity and they are not open to hearing it? What do you say about that?
Yeah, definitely a great question. It's very difficult, the short answer, but I do think there are some strategies that can help. So if someone does have an identity that is going to motivate them to not want to listen to what you're saying, there's a few ways that you can at least increase your chance of being heard. What I always say is I don't try to start these conversations with the goal of changing minds, but to increase the odds of them listening to my perspective. So ways to do that could be connecting via a shared identity outside of that identity that you mentioned that might be challenging to the information. So maybe you both have parenthood identity as something that's shared, or maybe it could even be something like liking the same sports team. I mean, there's research showing that if you can connect on any meaningful identity first, then when you talk about a contentious topic, it's actually less polarizing, because people are more likely to receive information when they can view it from someone who they perceive belongs to their group. So the more you can convey that you are on the same side, at least on something, the more likely they can see you as part of their team, and they're more likely to hear what you're saying. So I think that's a big component, is like using these identity forces to promote productive conversations. And then more broadly, there's some strategies to the language that we use. So trying to reframe the conversation in a way that addresses their concerns. Maybe you're disagreeing on a specific topic, but you broadly agree on something else. Or maybe you could get them to agree on that topic if you frame it in a way of something they care about. So maybe they really care about the economics of it, and you really care about the justice side of it, or something like that. Then you can present it in a way that aligns with their incentives and what they're concerned about. And then finally, I think also just the specific words we use when we're having these conversations can be helpful. So instead of trying to paint things in a binary of right versus wrong, I often think it's useful to try and understand where people are coming from and ask them how they came to that conclusion, and have them work through step by step why they believe what they believe. And I think that facilitates conversations that will foster curiosity and shared understanding. And again, with the goal of at least them listening to what you're saying, and then they can ultimately decide on their own if they want to agree with you or not.
This is a really beautiful thing, and I just have to jump in because I'm experiencing something that's called DBT with my family. It's a family therapy, and it basically means that two things can be true at the same time. And all the stuff you're talking about seems to be very much aligned with the way that we're learning how to position things in our family in order to get to better outcomes. It's not right or wrong. There's empathy and multiple truths. But I have to tell you, I'm in New York City, and we have this therapist, and I guess therapy is becoming more popular in our world, and it's definitely getting into some of our schools, but it's not everywhere. And I just think that the way you phrased it was very mature. But what about all those other people that are like, stop it with the therapy?
You know what I mean?
My mom would say, that psychobabble.
Thank God there's somebody like Matthew saying that they have, intersection, complexity, overlap. These people, these assholes out here, Matthew, they don't know that any of that is happening inside their brain.
That's right. It's either right or wrong. And that's the way most of us grew up. And now there's a lot of different shades of gray, and a lot more room for interpretation. And I'm watching my children grow that way.
Can I'm going to build on this. Multiple truths. So fuck truth. Sorry, Matt. Like, you know what I mean? Like honestly, I think that might be part of the reason why people check out and just say, I'm just shipping misinformation, disinformation. Who even cares information? Because there are multiple truths. Now, what do you there can't be. What do you think about that?
So if I'm understanding you guys correctly, it's the concept of cynicism is like,
wait a minute.
It's not necessarily cynicism. I'm certainly a cynical person.
Even like someone presenting with that idea of like there is no truth, like who knows. So that's one side of it.
Kind of. I'm just kind of getting into the mind of somebody who doesn't appreciate all the layers that you were laying down.
Yes.
They're just like, man, there's multiple truths, aren't there? So screw it. Wait, Jess.
Say something.
No, I want to pretend that I know what Matthew's going to say. And it's then frame it in the language that speaks to your target audience, right? If psychobabble isn't the way to unlock somebody and get them to be vulnerable, then you speak to them in black and white terms, like mano y mano, if that's what it is. If it's like a manly thing, you can
I see what you're
give
saying.
them examples and create the room that they are comfortable in, right? And I feel like a dialectical behavioral therapy is great because it does set a framework, DBT, set a framework for people to figure out why they have irrational viewpoints. And basically it's getting down to what I believe, Matthew, from listening to you talk on podcasts and in this conversation, and it's what I always get back to, this is like me on my soapbox, is removing ego, right? In order to come to a middle ground and move forward. So if your identities that overlap are, you know, all in alignment, you're even more susceptible to misinformation because your ego is in the front row, right? And so removing that or trying to step back from it helps come to a common ground. So it's like the 6 thinking hats, Edward de Bono. It's like, you know, mindfulness and ego and meditation. All these things I feel like are connected in the points that you're making.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So Jessica was spot on. So I feel like I don't honestly have a lot more to add to that. It connects to what I was saying about trying to reframe the conversation to address their concerns. It's also reframing the conversation to match the language and meet them where they are. Because from our perspective, if we care about something or have studied something a lot and someone is presenting a claim that's contrary to that, it might be really frustrating and it might feel like they're viewing the world in a very different way or in binary terms. But as human beings, we generally have a lot more in common than we don't have in common. And you can connect with people on a lot of different ways. Like sometimes people ask me, it's like, how do I connect with someone who thinks so differently than me? And I'm like, well, are you both human? Like, that's a good starting place. and then they are. So it's like, okay, you can go to the next step. Like, you both eat food, you both exist on planet Earth. Like, there's lots of things you have in common beyond politics, even if you don't have anything politically in common, which you probably do as well. So I think there's a lot of opportunities to meet people where they are and connect with them on a variety of topics. It just takes a little bit of humility on our part to think where they might be coming from and where we could connect with them. So yeah, I think presenting it in terms that make sense to them can be really helpful. And I do think people do care about being accurate. And it's just sometimes there are identities that supersede those accuracy goals because they're providing them with so many community or meaning goals that can override it. So it really depends on the context and who you're talking to, but there's definitely opportunities to meet people where they are and use language that will resonate with them.
Wow, man, this is so good. Okay, so you said something. You can't change mine. You can only increase. What was it again? Don't focus on me, Jay. No, what was it? You can only increase what was it?
The likelihood of your perspective being heard. I think it was something like that.
So guess what? That is literally the definition of marketing that Dale Harrison just gave us. Like,
Oh yeah.
Well, I mean, this is a physicist like crunching huge numbers and stuff, but it was like, you're not going to change minds. What you're going to get maybe is an increased likeliness that your perspective or product, service, whatever will be heard or seen or considered or whatever. So it's really interesting that what you're saying in our lived lives, experience, things that we're having with family members and politics, that same kind of truth is living in markets and marketing. But the main thing I was thinking when you were describing this person who wasn't listening to me, I was thinking of the CEO. I was like, yeah, because again, it's so interesting that you just align with people. One thing that I've done as I was reading this man's book, I was on LinkedIn and just trolling around. But I found people that were saying whack stuff, and I got into the comments and appreciated them in some kind of weird way. I said something mentioning that they were like on top of it, or like, I can see that you understand this subject, or something like that. Something that I wouldn't usually do. You would just say, you wrong. Here's how I'm right. But I managed to get a couple different motions in, and I'm like friends with people who I don't agree with, but we are hanging out and sending DMs and stuff. And it's like, it's only because I checked in with one of their identities, but I didn't even know what I was doing. I was just trying to not make myself crazy and just show this person that I hear what you're saying. You know, and it totally brought down the temperature like 40 degrees. So I'm just saying, Matt, do you think it's a good idea that people should get into social conversations maybe that they don't dig and say, hey, I love Kiss. Do you love Kiss? Or I love French toast. Do you love French toast? Well, let's talk. You know, like, do you think, is that ham-fisted? But should people do that? Should they practice this?
I mean, I think so. I think it's useful for navigating social situations to have practice navigating difficult conversations.
Sure,
and I worry that we're kind of losing that because it's so easy to find people who agree with us on any topic on the internet, and you could just be reinforced with that with the algorithms and AI. So you can just be in your little bubble, and your bubble can be more refined. And then anytime you go outside your bubble, it feels even worse because you have no practice doing that. So I do think there's value to that. I don't think people necessarily have to do it, especially I don't think they have to do it if it's, you know, debating something like if they belong to some group that's under attack politically. I don't think they have to get into a social media debate with a stranger about it.
Sure.
I think more broadly, the idea of talking to people who think differently than you can benefit society in a variety of ways. Like on a macro level, again, it connects lots of different people seeing each other as human beings, so they're not so polarized and othering the other group as much. And it can, again, broaden your own identity structure and network structure, so you're less polarized and you're more open to information that challenges your own identities. So I do think there's a lot of utility to it, and I think it can be challenging for sure, but I do think it's worthwhile.
I love that. And Jess, I just kind of wanted to talk to you really quick because you brought up ego. And I know that my ego has been killed multiple times. And it wasn't because I decided to put it in harm's way. Like usually I'm like on stage or something and like you just get destroyed and you're like, oh God. Or relationship problems that'll feed your ego to yourself. So ego death usually we don't go looking for it. We're not Charles Bronson. You know what I mean? We don't have an ego death wish. How are you going to get people to get their ego in the room with them and dismiss it? Jess, I mean, I just want you to maybe, like you were talking about hats and I didn't know what you were saying. And it sounds like, but ego death, talk to me. Like how am I going to get rid of ego if that's the main thing?
Sure. I think that exposure, increased entropy, friction, that's where growth happens, right? And so I think, like Matt said, we have to go out of our way to find it right now. If we want to get pissed off, if we want to be a hater, we can easily go online and look at the trolls and say that they're, you know, a black box. They're just a troll. But if you look at their profile, if it's not a ghost profile, you might start to unpack why they're that way, right? I learned a lot being in line at trade shows, like waiting for the bathroom or for food and just poking on somebody and asking them questions and that, you know, letting them lead, right? Because of course everybody wants to hear you talk, right? Themselves talk.
Themselves, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And if you let somebody else talk, you're actually getting value out of that, right? Just because you're getting exposure to something that you wouldn't normally. There's increased friction, even if it pisses you off, right? And the 6 thinking hats, when I got my MBA, I read a lot of leadership texts, and that one I keep coming back to it because it just really talks in the same way that DBT is such an awesome framework. I think that the 6 thinking hats is basically when it's a framework for meetings, and you go in, you know, all the different colors of the hats mean different things. Like red is emotions, and green is opportunities, and white is neutrality, things like that. Black, possible concerns. And rather than coming in like I'm the marketing department and I need more budget.
Right. I was just about to say budget.
Yeah, that's all we want, right? And don't fire us, please. And I want more support with sales for the things that we're trying to push.
Right.
And then finance is like, oh God, no, that's not happening. And if you remove, if you all say, well, let's think of ideas of how we can solve this. Let's all put on our, green hat. What are all the ideas, rather than coming from, I'm the financial person, just I'm a human, like Matthew said, and I eat food.
That's really good.
And
so
yes, and instead of
Can I just say the
money?
saddest thing is the
and
saddest.
instead of no but.
Oh, yes and no but. But the saddest thing, Jess, as you were describing this, I thought I was wearing all those hats at one time.
You are. You have to kind of, and so it's like
Ego.
the metaphor is kind of taking off. Instead of having walkie talkies with your team around a broken house and saying the garage door is totally screwed up. No, I don't see that. I see, a window's missing.
Oh, the blind elephant thing.
We
Yeah.
kind of all walk around the house together to see what things can be fixed. And I mean, wouldn't that be great if we did that with?
It would be great. And guess what? I think what's really cool about what we've built here with the Marketing Accountability Council is that in many ways, I think we wear lots of different hats. We can disagree with each other and then leave as friends. We can challenge the status quo, and Michael, with the Clean Data Alliance, we're doing the same thing. I think we're seeing a lot of communities that are building around that. And I think, Moni, you have your community that, connects like-minded people. Jake, you build community with your employer. Matthew, are people think of groups like Chief, stuff like that? Is this why people are building these types of communities?
Or does the community reinforce the biases?
Yeah,
These could be true at the same time.
absolutely. Yeah, that's a great point. But I think both, certainly, and that's something to be mindful of. And that speaks to the importance of having diversity within these communities, so you can have a variety of perspectives and people feel like they can bring their own voice to the table. And it's not just an echo chamber. I mean, there's a lot of work showing that, if you get people in a room and they all agree with each other, they could come out after the discussion even more polarized than they were to start. But if you have some people in that group, even if it's people who generally agree, if you just have one person that's facilitating dialogue in a way that's more encouraging of deliberation and thoughtfulness, it can actually reduce polarization. So I do think it's important to be mindful of the groups we belong to and think about how, if they are reinforcing our own biases, or if they're allowing us to challenge ourselves, because that's one of the best ways to reduce our own biases and know about our own biases is to speak with other people. So having a conversation with someone else, and they'll point out the flaws in your logic. But if you're only talking to people who agree with you, and especially if you're only talking to people about certain topics that they agree with you, you're not probably going to have a lot of growth in that space. So again, so much of this comes down to diversity of thought, diversity of identities, diversity of network structures. And I think will protect against some of the vulnerabilities.
But guess what? We have all these trade organizations that are funded by people that are not incentivizing anyone to disagree with anything, and they're incentivized to keep the status quo.
Sure.
So how do we, literally, the more mature an organization gets, the more support it has from across the industry, the less likely it's going to encourage that thoughtful dialogue. In marketing, we have a trade organization that literally is openly going against a lot of the principles that would make marketing better, because some of their members are companies that profit from deceit.
Mm-hmm.
So in situations like that, how do we, I don't even know.
Yeah.
Maybe, do you just keep on pretending to have these conversations? Or do we maybe we start other organizations on the fringes to change that attitude?
Yeah, I think you could. It really depends on the organization and the institution. I think a lot about institutions, specifically universities and medical scientific institutions. And I think broadly, we do see this proclivity to move towards conservatism on the institutional level. Like, and this is something that other people have studied more than me, but it seems like as these organizations get really big, they want to maintain that status quo because things are working well. They have a lot of resources and they want to maintain what they have. So at least in the institutions I'm referring to, we see this kind of more conservative approach where you don't update as quickly. So again, I'm focusing on like universities, scientific institutions where they haven't incentivized science communication, science outreach as much. They have this very traditional top-down messaging strategy, and they've been doing that for a long time, and they really haven't funded or took a risk to go in different directions. And now we're seeing that that's backfired, and people have lost trust in these institutions, largely because of some of the, I mean, there's a lot of factors that have gone into this. One of the big ones is their failure of communication. So by not investing in things proactively that could help them, they now have to do this catching up retroactively. And we're finally seeing some institutions adapt and adjust to this. So I guess, ideally, you would want to fund proactive and this proactive diversity of thought ahead of time. It's always tricky though, because, if you're looking at these short-term balance sheets, you might say, oh, we don't need to spend as much time thinking about this thing that might happen in the future. And then when that thing happens, then you have to catch up. And I worry that that's kind of like a human flaw in our logic, that we're so focused on the short term that sometimes we miss the long term. And again, that speaks to the importance of having lots of different people at the table and having their voices heard. So you can have at least one person saying, hey, you need to worry about this and should focus on this before it becomes a bigger issue than it already is.
Right.
Matthew, in your research, where have you seen, where was the inflection point? Because propaganda has been around forever, right? Like people have always been sort of siloed in their communities, and like with like-minded people, you could probably argue we're have more access to diversity of thought than ever before. So like these elements that have caused sort of misinformation has always been there. What
Right.
has made it so exacerbated over the last 20, 30 years? Is it just sheer internet? There's the institution of the media being kind of, broken down. There's more access to information. Like what has caused this kind of explosion of sort of misinformation?
I think it's all of those and more. We see the internet allows us to find information that confirms our biases and align with people who already agree with us in a very easy way. And that facilitates that identity bias process that I outlined earlier. And then over the past 20, 30 years, we've seen the media structure change a lot, where there's been more niche media systems that lean into their audiences and don't try to present this broad view of news coverage, for example. So you might have these media companies pop up that just lean into presenting the news in one political slant or another. And then politicians have mapped onto that as well. The political rhetoric in the past 20, 30 years is a lot more polarizing than before. And this was the same thing with news coverage. News coverage is using much more sensationalized words. So you see all of these happening at once. And you also see people becoming more socially isolated, even though we have an opportunity to connect with more people online than ever before. So I think all of these are converging in a way where you see more and more people who are unhappy and lonely and polarized. And that's a recipe for believing falsehoods. So you have to slowly deconstruct each of those factors and try to peel back their influence if we want to really address this at a macro structural level. So that's a big challenge. And, a lot of my work tries to focus on education and teaching media and digital literacy skills. But I think it's also really important to address the community level. So getting hospital systems and universities connecting with their local communities to rebuild that trust and foster these partnerships so people are able to connect with people who think differently than they are and not be left behind like they have been before. So I think it's all of those and more to answer your question.
That was a deep one. We should have started with that one, Moni. That was good. Well, before we peace out, I just want to make sure everybody gets a chance. Michael, speaking about universities, speaking about, these kind of institutions, what's your thought here? And, what kind of questions might you have?
Well, I think about why we're here. It's called the
Mm.
Marketing Accountability Council, right?
Right.
So we're supposed to be talking about marketing.
True.
So I think of the whole identity issue, and I think about how my least favorite term in marketing that every day I'm becoming more disdainful of it is a word that is used by everybody in marketing and advertising. It's like one of the first words that comes out of their mouth when they're going to think about who their audience is. What's the word that comes to mind?
Target.
Yes. So as much as it's important to know, like, as much as it's important to identify with someone based on their identity, there's probably nothing that upsets people more than being someone else assuming what their identity is and messaging them based on that. And so when we look at the 1% is success kind of conversion rates for advertising,
Right.
it tells you that there's a lot of assumptions that were made about people that were very wrong. And that is based on having really no idea who they're messaging or why, and that's a product of having terrible data, right? So I wonder, from my own experience, like I had a company called Helping that was a privacy protecting social network that was based on opt-in viewing of advertising messages, promotional messages, and businesses. And we had it running for like 700 people in an office building before the pandemic happened. We're not around now because the pandemic happened, but that's a whole nother story. And we ran only opt-in promotions and opportunities to see participating businesses. And the rate of engagement that we had with just people deciding, I'm interested in this, without anyone targeting them with, I should be interested in this because you think I am, kind of thing. Just getting whoever was interested in the offer of the business, just no matter what their identity was way more effective than any kind of targeted advertising, like 4 to 8 times more effective. And so when we live in this world where it's all about more targeting, it's more about, I'm going to bring the message that I think you're interested in to you. It's clearly not working. And so I'm just interested from your perspective, Matthew, based on what I've said, what is your advice to marketers when it comes to considering the importance of identity, and how should they apply that to what they're doing in their jobs on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, that's a big question. So while identity is important for understanding a lens of where people are coming from, we also shouldn't over rely on it to the point of pandering to an audience. And I think about politics a lot. So you see politicians pandering to their audiences, and I think it backfires a lot of the time. So you have to be really mindful of where your audience is coming from and actually listening to what they care about instead of making those assumptions. And I do think can be a difficult line when you're not having one-on-one conversations and you're trying to make an assumption, like you said, like based on incomplete data. So ideally you'd get better data and try to understand where people are coming from and trying to solve a problem that they're interested in and they care about.
You get better data? What? How would you do that, Michael? Just kidding. We're building a company based on.
They're trying to sell you something, Matthew. Don't let them do it.
Marketers never stop, bro.
Sorry.
That's good. That's interesting. I mean, I'm interested in better data. I mean, maybe you could sell me on it.
Yeah, exactly.
Maybe another time.
Well,
Yeah.
so but one question before I go, and then you have to tell everybody where they can connect with you, Matthew. AI. We haven't said the A word. I'm thinking, as you just said, diversity of like, well, I'm using Claude, I'm using Gemini, like I have a diversity of models, brah. I think I'm pretty good. So talk about this research as it's hitting the AI moment we're seeing right now. Just if somebody's thinking I have diversity of thought, it's ChatGPT.
Yeah, I mean, I think that would be an issue.
How
For
cool is
sure.
it that we got through like an hour conversation without mentioning AI?
I know.
Yeah,
I'm
same.
Oh, that's good.
He's
That's
fine. Matthew's like, I'm good.
yeah. I mean, it pops up a lot, and I think it's an important discussion. I think AI again is reinforcing a lot of these pressure points that I mentioned previously. So the hyper personalization of it. So instead of finding people online that agree with you, you can just generate it out of thin air with these chatbots and create something that agrees with you. And I think it just reduces even more friction of alignment between your actions and everyday behavior and the meanings and values associated with your identity. So it's an amplifier of stuff that we've already discussed. That's how I view it. But it's still worth mentioning to understand it. And, we could talk a lot about AI in specific cases of how it influences the information system. There's a lot of things that I think about as far as chatbots, hallucinating, but also just the amount of fake images and videos that are being spread online and how people are more likely to interact with them and if it aligns with their identity. It's just amplifying a lot of the issues that we see. There's a lot more noise, a lot more pollution in our information ecosystem. And I think it presents an even greater emphasis on trust and trying to understand why people would trust the information that they see as opposed to just blindly agreeing with a chatbot. So really trying to, I think as we rely more on AI in many cases, I think more people are valuing that human connection and trying to understand where that information came from.
Can I ask a question about Sora?
Sure.
So it has the watermark on it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you can tell that it was a Sora video, but the realness of those videos is shocking. Like it's a shock to the system. Like, so it probably isn't going to be very long, or maybe some people don't even notice it or acknowledge it, that the watermark is there, obviously, because OpenAI was like, oh, we got to make sure that we're labeling this as fake or whatever, but or contrived. But what is going to happen, or what is the mechanism, or what's the implication of people no longer like seeing the watermark, but like basically they're believing that it's real based on what they're seeing and not making the connection that actually this was phony.
What they're feeling more like, Mike. I mean, that's what I'm saying. Like, if the feeling that I got from watching Sora has stayed with me. The fact that I think an orangutan has got sucked off into a tornado, I don't think that's a fact, but I cannot stop feeling it.
Right.
So,
yeah, I mean, I think we're already seeing that already, even though it just was introduced. I think people have this motivation to want to believe things that make them feel a certain way, and they might not care, and they might share it and amplify it. And there's a lot of people that don't even know what Sora is and don't even know what that watermark means, which I think is interesting that there's this watermark. But I would like to see a study. Maybe someone has already done this study, but I would imagine it doesn't make a whole big of a difference. Like,
no, that's my point.
it's how fast it spreads.
Well,
Right.
I mean, Sora has created its own social network that is basically TikTok just with Sora videos. But the other thing that's happening is people are then downloading the Sora videos and posting them on TikTok and posting them on YouTube and stuff like that. Like, and they're really offensive. Like Bob Barker is giving out prizes for the Price is Right to people that obviously can't use the prize that he's giving them. Right. And like I feel bad laughing at this. gross. It's like really sick stuff, but it's so outrageous, and that's what's happening. People need that outrage in order to even
brain. So just say brain rot.
It's brain rot.
Yeah.
Matthew, talk about brain rot because it's coming for us.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's already here, unfortunately. Wasn't that what the dictionary word of the year or
Yeah,
something?
it was. I think last year.
Yeah,
Was
last
it?
year. So it was already a year ago. We've
I'm
already
late.
been brain
This
rotting
year,
for a year.
That's
This
when
year
you
in
know you're talking to
6-7.
a marketer because I'm late to the party. Okay. So no, brain rot's here. So just like media literacy, I think that we're over time. The main point is if you want to fix this, maybe don't think about how people can stop lying to you, but how I can be more trustworthy, how I can behave in a trustworthy manner. And one of the most trusting things you could do is go pick up this book and go follow Matthew on Substack and go give him all the love on LinkedIn, because postdoctoral researcher, y'all, he needs support and we're here to help him. And just say, we're going to lift him up because more people need to know how we can get out of this misinformation period.
Yes.
So,
and one more plug for Matthew in this book is that one of the hidden things that it doesn't call out, but it does very well, teach you how to communicate better. And as marketers, we're communicators. So that is why I am a huge proponent of this book and give you some good communication skills. Read
I
it.
want to
Thank you.
plug the podcast.
Yeah.
Think like a fact checker. Everybody required listening.
Thank you. Yeah, that was a great episode. Yeah, Joel Breakstone.
Horizontal research. Yes.
We will put the links in the
all this
story.
links.
Yes.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
but where can they find you directly? What's the best way to get in contact with you?
Yeah, so as you all mentioned, I'm active with my newsletter and my podcast, both called Misguided, also leaning into the brand of my book, Misguided. So if you Google that, it will pop up. If you Google my name, Matthew Facciani, you'll see my website that has all my latest work, all the things I've been doing. I'm most active on Threads and Blue Sky and Instagram, and I am on LinkedIn sometimes too. So those are the main ones that I use as far as social media. But I'm out there trying to talk about these topics and engage with as many people as I can.
The best. Man, thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you.
Wow.
Thank you. Thank you all so much. It was great speaking with all of you today. And thank you all so much for your thoughtful questions and perspectives.
There's
Thank
so
you,
much
Matthew.
more. I'm gonna keep bothering you. Michael is now gonna bother you. Jess is now subscribed. We're just gonna keep bothering you, man.
Totally fine.
All right. Well then, that's it, right?
That's it.